Isolde Omega remembered the flavor of every poison in the Elder's vault. Solan's wrists had been bound since noon. It was now well past 3 in the afternoon, and the rope had left a thin red line across both of his wrists that he had stopped thinking about, because there was no point in thinking about things he could not change. He stood on a raised wooden platform in a hall that smelled of candle wax and cold stone, and he kept his eyes fixed on the back wall, because looking at the crowd made his jaw tighten in a way he refused to allow. The hall was large. Perhaps 60 people occupied the rows of dark chairs below the platform, and every one of them was watching him with the calm, assessing attention of people who had come to make a financial decision. The ceiling above was vaulted stone, the floor was polished dark timber, and the oil lamps along the walls burned without flickering, because the air inside this room held no current. Everything was still. Everything was deliberate. Solan was 18 years old. He had been brought here in a covered carriage, driven by 2 men from his father's household, and he had not been told the destination until the carriage stopped and the door opened, and one of the men said, without looking at him, "This is where you get out." The rope had been tied after that. He had not fought it. He had known, with the particular exhausted clarity that came from 3 days of watching his father avoid his eyes, that something like this was coming. His father's name was Gerald Ashwick. Gerald Ashwick was a man who organized his life with great precision around 2 categories, what was useful and what was not. Solan had understood this for as long as he could remember, and he had spent most of his 18 years trying, in various ways, to be useful. He was a quick reader. He was good at numbers. He remembered things with unusual accuracy. He had thought, in the way that young people think things before they understand what the world is actually measuring, that these qualities might matter. They had not mattered enough. His older brother Owen had received his designation at 16. Owen was an alpha. He was broad in the shoulders and decisive in manner, the kind of person who walked into rooms and made other people adjust their posture. Owen had been called a gift to the family from the moment his designation was confirmed, and he had grown into the word comfortably, the way someone grows into a coat that was made for them. Solan's designation had come late, at 18, and it had come back Omega. Gerald Ashwick had not raised his voice when the physician read the result. He had not changed expression. He had said, "I see," in his even, organized way, and he had left the room. 3 days later, a man from the Drummond Bureau had come to visit, and Solan had not been included in that conversation. This room was the result of that conversation. The man at the front of the platform was named Felix Drummond. He was short and pale, with a pressed suit and the practiced manner of someone who had done this work so long that it no longer registered as anything unusual. He was describing Solan the way a factor at a warehouse describes an item of inventory: age, designation, health record, literacy confirmed, physical condition acceptable. He did not look at Solan while he spoke. He addressed the room with brisk efficiency, pausing only when a buyer raised a hand with a question. "Are the health records independently verified?" "They are." "Is the designation official?" "It is on file with the central registry." "Thank you." Solan looked at the back wall and counted the stones. He had gotten to 37 when the bidding started. He told himself he was not afraid. He said this to himself in the quiet interior of his own mind, firmly and without room for argument, because the alternative was to let the fear show on his face, and he had made a decision in the carriage. The decision was this: whatever happened inside this room, whatever came after, he would not give anyone here the satisfaction of watching him come apart. He kept his breathing even. He kept his shoulders level. He kept his face the same as it always was, still, watching, taking in more than it gave back. The bidding was brief. 5 participants. It ended in less than 2 minutes. Solan heard the numbers climb in Felix Drummond's clipped voice, heard the room's quiet murmur as the final figure was called, and then heard footsteps on the platform stairs. He did not turn. "Look at me, please." The voice was not loud. It was not rough. It was the voice of a man who had never needed to raise it, because everyone around him had already understood, without being told, that they were supposed to listen. The man standing in front of him was older than he had expected. He was not frail, there was nothing frail about him, but old in the way that certain things are old, worn smooth by long exposure to something harder than ordinary time. His hair was entirely white. His posture was exact. His eyes were the gray of deep water before a storm. He wore no decoration. His coat was plain and dark, and he was in the process of pulling on a pair of gloves, one finger at a time, with the careful attention of a person who considered small actions worth doing correctly. He looked at Solon the way a skilled craftsman looks at a tool he is considering, thoroughly and without emotion. He checked Solon's hands, turned them over once, looked at his eyes for a moment, noted something that Solon could not read, and stepped back. "Yes," he said. He said it to the thin man standing 2 paces behind him, who Solon would later learn was named Cecil Holt. One word. Solon's entire future from this moment forward had been decided by a single word spoken by a stranger who had not yet introduced himself. His name, Solon was told during the carriage ride north, was Elder Harwick. Everyone who worked for him referred to him as the Elder, and he lived in a manor in the mountain territory roughly 3 hours north of the capital. Cecil Holt sat across from Solon in the carriage and delivered this information in the dry, precise way of someone reading from a prepared brief. "You will be assigned duties on arrival," Cecil said. "You will follow instructions without question. You will not enter any room you have not been cleared for. You will not address the Elder unless he addresses you first. These are not suggestions, and they are not negotiable." Solon looked at the window. The fields outside had gone flat and brown in the late season. The sky was a uniform gray. "What happened to the person who had my position before me?" he asked. Cecil was quiet for a moment. "They are no longer here," he said. Solon nodded, as though this were a complete answer, and returned his attention to the passing countryside. It was not a complete answer, but the way Cecil said it told him more than any explanation would have. The road north climbed steadily. The landscape changed entirely as the altitude increased. The flat capital fields giving way to dense stands of bare-branched trees, the bare trees giving way to rock faces, and, higher still, the pale permanent snowfields that sat on the highest ridges all year. The air coming through the carriage's poorly sealed window grew sharper and colder with every mile. Solon had never been this far from the city. He had grown up in a specific district of the capital, in a tall, orderly house that his mother Vera kept in constant careful order. He had attended the local school, read books borrowed from the district library, spent his evenings at the kitchen table while his mother moved things around on shelves, for reasons that had nothing to do with organization, and everything to do with not thinking. He had not traveled. He had not needed to. He had believed, for a long time, that the world he could see from the windows of that house was a reasonable approximation of the world at large. He was beginning to understand how small that window had been. Owen had not come to say goodbye. His mother had not come either. He had not expected them to, and the fact that he had not expected it was perhaps the loneliest part of the entire day. Not the rope, not the platform, not the crowd of strangers assessing his monetary worth, but the simple fact that the absence of his family surprised him not at all. He turned the cold iron key over in his pocket, given to him by Felix Drummond's assistant, a quiet woman named Ada Birch, with no explanation of what it opened, and watched the trees. The manor appeared as the road curved around a long ridge. It was built against the mountain, in the most literal sense. The rear half of it appeared to vanish directly into the rock face, as though the building and the mountain had grown into each other over time, each taking on something of the other's character. The result was neither beautiful nor ugly. It was simply imposing. Dark stone, narrow windows, a quality of permanence that suggested it had been here long before anyone living could remember, and intended to be here long after. The iron gate at the entrance was worked into a pattern of interlocked lines that Solon spent a moment studying, before Cecil's voice moved him along. A woman was waiting in the courtyard. Her name was Nora Wynne. She was perhaps 40, efficient in her movements, with a ring at her belt that held more keys than any single person should reasonably need. She looked at Solon with the flat, appraising expression of someone who had processed a great many new arrivals, and felt nothing in particular about any of them. "I'll take him to be documented," she said to Cecil, who nodded and walked away without looking back. The documentation room was small and plain, a desk, 2 chairs, a lamp, and a ledger that Nora opened with the ease of long habit. She asked Solon the same questions in the same order that she had clearly asked dozens of times before. Name, age, designation, prior work, medical history, reading and writing ability. She wrote his answers in small, neat handwriting and did not comment on any of them. When she finished, she placed a plain iron key on the desk between them. Solon looked at it. It was similar to the one he already had in his pocket, but slightly different. Heavier, with a more complex tooth pattern. "You've been assigned to the vault," she said. He saw it again. The same shadow that had crossed Ada Birch's face briefly when she handed him the first key. In Nora it was faster, more controlled, but it was there. A kind of careful distance, the way people look when they want to make sure they are not standing too close to something that might go wrong. "What is the vault?" he asked. "The Elder's primary collection," she said. "You will maintain it. You will catalog the contents, keep the environmental conditions within the specified range, and report any irregularities to Cecil Holt. You will not open any sealed container without written authorization from the Elder. You will wear the protective gloves stored in the first cabinet, to the left of the door. You will not linger inside longer than necessary." She paused. "These are not preferences. These are the conditions of your role." "Has anything ever gone wrong in there?" he asked. She looked at him for a moment. "I'll return to check on you at midday," she said, which was not an answer to the question he had asked. She left him alone in the documentation room, with both keys, and a growing understanding of the shape of the place he had arrived in. This was a manor, where people did not answer questions they did not want to answer. This was a manor, where previous occupants of his position simply were no longer here. This was a manor, where a woman who had worked for 11 years still looked a certain way when a specific room was mentioned. He placed both keys in his pocket and thought about what he knew. He knew the vault was below the main floor. He knew it held a collection. He knew it had been assigned to him specifically, and not to any of the other servants he had glimpsed. He knew that the person who held this position before him was gone, and that no one would tell him how or why. He knew, with the particular, clean certainty that came from a lifetime of watching his father treat things as either useful or expendable, that he needed to be very careful. Not careful in the ordinary sense. Careful in the sense of someone who had just arrived at the edge of something deep, without being told how deep it went. He stood up. Nora had assigned him a room on the upper floor, a narrow space with a cot, a chest, and a window overlooking the courtyard. He would see it later. First, he wanted to find where the vault was and look at the door. He did not go inside. Not yet. He walked the lower corridor until he found the stairs leading down, followed them to the second level below ground, found the iron door at the end of the passage, and stood in front of it long enough to understand its locks and its weight and the angle of the hinges. Then he went back upstairs. In the evening, he sat on the edge of his cot and listened to the building. Stone manors had their own language at night, the small sounds of old material adjusting to temperature changes, the muffled evidence of other lives being lived in nearby rooms, the way silence in a stone building was never truly silent, but was instead a texture, a layering of very small sounds, into something that resembled quiet without actually being it. He catalogued each sound. By the time he finally lay down to sleep, he had a working picture of the manor's nighttime rhythms, and he had made himself one quiet, firm promise. He was going to understand every part of this place before it had the chance to understand him. He closed his eyes. Outside, the wind moved over the mountain, and the manor stood against it without shifting at all. The vault catalog was kept in a leather-bound book that was exactly as old as it looked. Solon found it in the first cabinet to the left of the door, beneath the shelf of protective gloves, and he stood inside the vault entrance on his first working morning, and read the first 10 pages before he moved another inch. The catalog was precise. Every entry listed a vial number, a location on the shelving grid, a description of contents, a date of acquisition, and a condition rating updated at each inspection. The handwriting changed several times across the pages. Different people had maintained this record over the years, and Solon could trace the changes without effort. The most recent entries were in handwriting that was slightly less practiced than the others, with occasional corrections, as though the person writing them had been hurrying or had been nervous. The final entry in that handwriting was dated 91 days ago. Solon filed this fact away without reacting to it and continued reading. The vials were organized by section. Each section occupied a specific region of the shelving grid and was identified by a letter and number code that corresponded to the catalog's index. The descriptions of the contents were minimal. A name or a technical term, nothing more. Solon recognized some of the names from his reading. Others he did not know. There were several that were described with only a series of numbers rather than any name at all, which suggested to him that whoever had named them had decided that keeping those names out of a written document was the better choice. He closed the catalog and put it back in the cabinet. He pulled on a pair of the protective gloves, thin but close-fitting, made of a material that was neither leather nor cloth but something between the two, and walked to the first shelf. He began his work. The first morning, he covered the A section, 42 vials. He checked each one against its catalog entry, location correct, seal intact, condition as expected. He noted 3 vials whose wax seals had developed a hairline discoloration he could not find in the condition notes, wrote them into a small observation log he had decided to keep separately from the official catalog, and returned them to their positions. The work was quiet and repetitive, and required exactly the kind of sustained attention that his mind had always been able to give to things. He noticed, as he worked, that the shelving was arranged so that a person could walk the entire vault in a single continuous loop, A through F, on the upper floor, then down a short half staircase to the lower level, G through L. He did the upper loop that first morning. He did not go down the stairs. The catalog indicated the lower level existed but offered no additional information about it, and he had decided to move systematically. He also noticed, on the far end of the F shelf, a small imperfection in the wooden bracket that held a section divider in place. It was not structural. It was the kind of mark left by something hard pressing repeatedly against soft wood, a thumbnail perhaps, or a key edge pressed into the bracket the way people press things when they are thinking and not aware of what their hands are doing. It was not in any inspection record. He looked at it for a long time without touching it, and then he moved on. At midday, Nora came to the door and opened it from the outside without knocking. She looked at him, looked at the shelf behind him, and said, "Progress?" "Upper loop complete," he said. 3 seals with minor discoloration. I've noted them separately. She did not ask to see the separate log. She nodded, told him lunch was available in the staff room, and held the door while he removed his gloves and stepped out. She locked the vault behind them, without saying anything more. The staff dining room held the same 6 people as that morning. One of them, he learned, was named Cress Farrow. He learned this not because anyone introduced them, no one did, but because another servant used her name while asking her to pass the salt, and Solon noted it. Cress Farrow had short dark hair and hands that moved with the precise economy of someone who worked with knives and heat and could not afford to waste emotion. She ate her food quickly and kept her eyes mostly on her plate, but twice he caught her glancing at him with the particular expression of someone assessing a person without wanting to be caught at it. He did not acknowledge that he had noticed. He ate his meal and went back to the vault. The afternoon took him through B and C sections. 93 vials, every seal intact, every catalog entry accurate. He found nothing unusual except for a small square of worn wood on the back wall at chest height. Not structural, not decorative, just worn, the way a surface becomes worn when a hand rests against it repeatedly in the same spot. He added it to his separate log with the same quiet note. Observed, no catalog entry, no explanation available. By the end of his first week in the vault, he had covered the entire upper level and accumulated 11 observations that did not correspond to anything in the official catalog. He had not gone down the half staircase yet. He would, but not until he understood the upper level completely. The 11 observations ranged in character from the minor to the significant. 2 were about seals, the hairline discolorations he had caught on day 1, plus a second pair he found in D section whose condition the catalog had not noted on its most recent inspection cycle. 1 was about the bracket on F shelf. 3 were about wear patterns on the wooden floors that indicated consistent foot traffic to specific positions on the shelves, positions that corresponded, when he checked the catalog, to items with acquisition dates in the most recent 18 months, rather than to the older, more established collection. This told him something about which items had been accessed most recently, and which parts of the vault were in most active use. The remaining 5 were about absences, items whose catalog entries existed but whose listed positions were occupied by nothing, not evidence of removal in any visible sense, just an empty bracket where the catalog said something should be. He had looked carefully at each empty position and found, in 4 of the 5, a thin residue inside the bracket that suggested the item had been there recently. The 5th was clean and showed no trace. 5 items, removed from their listed positions, not noted in any inspection update. He wrote each observation in his separate log, with its specific location and catalog reference, and set the log aside. He did not take it to Cecil. He told himself this was because the observations were not yet complete enough to constitute an irregularity worth reporting. He also knew that this was not the only reason, and that the other reason was more important. The D&E sections occupied the part of the upper vault that was most visible from the door, the part a person would see first if they opened the vault and looked in. The missing 5 items were all in the far end of the F and G upper sections, the part least visible from the entrance. Whoever had removed them had chosen the least visible portion of the most consistently monitored space. This was not an accident. His second week in the vault was different from the first. He was no longer learning the catalog against the physical reality of the shelves. He had done that. He was now learning something harder to quantify. The gap between what the catalog said and what was actually true, and what that gap revealed about how this room was being used. Every day, arriving for the morning session, he spent the first 20 minutes doing what he called a comparison review, setting the catalog description for a section against the section itself, looking not just for obvious irregularities, but for anything that did not quite match, anything whose condition rating was slightly better or slightly worse than it should be, given its age and handling record. In the second week, he found 2 more discrepancies, small ones, the kind that would mean nothing to someone maintaining a routine inventory. He wrote them in his log and continued. The people at the staff table had begun to clarify themselves through repetition. Each day at meals added something to his picture of each of them. The person with the ink-stained fingers was named Pell Marsh. He sat at the end of the table at dinner on the 4th evening and looked up from his folded pages long enough to nod at Solon. A small, deliberate nod. Not quite a greeting, but not nothing either. Pell had the quiet, self-contained quality of someone who had learned to take up very little space, not from weakness but from choice. He was perhaps 25. His fingers were stained with 2 different kinds of ink. The darker one suggested regular writing. The lighter, and more scattered one, suggested proximity to large amounts of printed material. A library, perhaps, or an archive. What Solon noticed most about Pell, over the course of the first 2 weeks, was not the stained fingers or the self-containment, but the way his eyes moved at meals. Pell always looked first at whoever had just arrived, specifically at their face and posture, specifically at the part below the eyes, where people were least able to control what showed, the set of the jaw, the tension in the neck. He looked once, quickly, and looked away. He did this with every person who entered. It was the visual habit of someone who had learned to take readings. The older man near the door was named Hugo Crane. He was not a servant, or rather, he was not the same kind of servant as the others. He sat differently, observed differently. And on the second evening Solon saw him speak to Cecil Holt with the kind of brief, coded communication that people use when they have worked together long enough to not need full sentences. Hugo Crane, Solon decided, was the elder's head of security. He filed this with the same matter-of-fact attention he gave everything, and said nothing. The 2 younger women who sat together and spoke quietly to each other at meals were named Dora and Nell. Dora worked in the laundry. Nell worked in the preparation room off the main corridor. The room Solon had not yet been cleared to enter, and about whose contents he was accumulating specific curiosity. He noted both of them and their roles and moved on. They were not the people he was building his understanding toward. On the 7th evening, something changed. He was returning from the vault at the end of his afternoon session when he passed a side corridor he had not taken before. He took it that evening out of simple information gathering, following it to a small alcove near the east wall of the manor. Inside the alcove was a wooden shelf with several items on it that did not belong to the manor's clean, impersonal aesthetic. A small comb, badly worn, a book with a cracked spine, and a piece of paper tucked inside the cover. A single button, dark gray, the kind that came from a working coat. He stood very still and looked at these things. They had been left here by someone who had lived in this manor and had put these things in this alcove. Perhaps because there was nowhere else to put personal objects, or perhaps because they wanted them somewhere they could reach easily. He did not touch them. He looked at the book long enough to read the title on the spine, a collection of recorded seasonal observations from a northern county, the kind of practical book carried by people who traveled or worked outdoors. He looked at the button. He thought about the last entry in the vault catalog, 91 days ago. He thought about the mark on the F-shelf bracket, the kind a person's thumbnail makes when they are standing there for a long time thinking, pressing the edge of something against the wood without being aware of it. He walked back to his room and sat on the edge of his cot, and thought for a long time about what kind of place this was. It was a place where people vanished without explanation. It was a place where every person who worked here had learned to keep their eyes on a small portion of the world immediately around them, and ask no questions about the rest of it. It was a place that held, in a locked vault 2 levels underground, hundreds of sealed vials of substances that a catalog described in language so minimal and careful that the language itself was a kind of answer. He was not safe here. He had understood that since the carriage. But understanding it in a general way and understanding it in the specific, concrete way that a left-behind button in a hidden alcove made him understand it were 2 very different things. He lay down on the cot and looked at the ceiling. He was going to need to be more than careful. He was going to need to be, in every moment, in every room, with every person, exactly the right amount of nothing. Unremarkable, predictable, useful enough to be kept, uninteresting enough not to be watched. And while everyone looked at the version of him that was unremarkable and predictable, the part of him that never stopped cataloging, never stopped noting, never stopped filing things away in the deep, ordered archive of his mind, that part was going to get very, very busy. He closed his eyes. He was not afraid. He repeated this to himself clearly and without room for argument. Outside, the mountain wind moved through the dark. 3 weeks into his time at the manor, Solanin was standing on the second step of the small rolling ladder used to reach the highest shelves of the vault when a vial on the topmost level slipped from between his gloved fingers. He caught it. Both hands, fast, the way his body moved before his mind had finished deciding. The vial struck his left palm, and he closed his fingers around it immediately. And for 3 full seconds, he stood frozen on the ladder, with the vial held safe in his grip. Every breath stopped, listening to his own heartbeat. Then he realized the seal had cracked. It was a hairline crack, not a break, not a spill, but enough of a gap that what was inside had exhaled briefly against his skin. He felt it as a faint warmth along the base of his thumb, where the edge of the glove did not cover. He came down the ladder quickly, set the vial in the secured cradle he used for damaged items, and waited. The warmth faded. His skin showed nothing. He felt no dizziness, no tightening in his throat, none of the responses he would have expected from exposure to something in this vault. What he felt instead, gradually, over the following 30 seconds, was a peculiar and almost overwhelming sharpness, as though someone had cleaned a lens he had not known was dirty. The shelves around him took on an extraordinary level of detail. The grain of the dark wood, the tiny imperfections in the glass of the nearest vials, the faint variation in color between one section of stone wall and the next. He could see all of it with a precision that was, in that moment, disorienting. And he could smell something. Not from the vault. Not from the cracked vial. From the back of his own mind, from the place where his memory stored things. He could smell the exact and detailed scent that had come through the crack in the vial's seal. A clean, cold, slightly mineral smell, like iron touched by winter air. And he understood, with a sudden clarity that landed like cold water, that he was not going to forget this. Not the smell, not the warmth, not the precise quality of the sharpness that had moved through his mind afterward. He would remember this the way he remembered everything, completely, permanently, with full access at any future moment he chose to reach for it. He stood very still in the vault and thought about what this meant. Interesting. Solon turned. He had not heard the vault door open. He had not heard footsteps. Elder Harwick stood 4 feet inside the entrance, his hands clasped behind his back, his gray eyes on Solon, with an expression that Solon had not seen on him before. In the 3 weeks Solon had been here, the elder had come to the vault twice, both times briefly, and both times he had looked at the shelves and not at Solon. He had never spoken to him inside this room. The seal cracked when I caught it, Solon said. He kept his voice level. I've secured the vial. I was about to note it and bring it to Cecil. The elder walked forward slowly. He stopped at the secured cradle and looked at the vial without touching it. Then he looked at Solon's hand, specifically at the area at the base of the left thumb, where the glove edge did not cover. How do you feel? He asked. Fine, Solon said. Specifically. Solon considered this. Clear, he said. A little unusually clear. The elder was quiet for a moment. Something in his expression had shifted, not visibly, not in any way a person would catch if they were not watching as carefully as Solon was watching. but it was there. A small adjustment, the way a person's posture changes when they have just received information they were not expecting, but are very pleased about. "Stay where you are," the elder said. He left the vault. He returned 4 minutes later, Solon had counted, carrying a flat case that he set down on the work table near the door. He opened it. Inside were 6 small vials, these ones without labels, arranged in a specific order that Solon did not yet understand. "I am going to open each of these," the elder said, "and I am going to hold it near you. You are going to tell me what you notice." It was not a question. "What are they?" Solon asked. "I want to know what you tell me before I answer that," the elder said. Solon looked at the case. He looked at the elder. He understood that refusing was not an option, and he understood something else as well, that this test had not been planned for today. The elder had been ready for it in some general sense, had the case somewhere nearby, had been prepared to use it at some point. But the vial slipping from Solon's fingers this morning had moved the timeline forward, which meant the elder had been waiting for something, watching for something. In the 3 weeks Solon had been here, he had believed he was the one watching. Now he understood that he had been watched as well. He took a steady breath and said, "All right." The elder opened the first vial. Solon breathed normally. A scent reached him. Faint, almost imperceptible, the kind of thing most people would not notice in ordinary air. Dry and slightly bitter, with an undertone of something that reminded him of the smell of ash after a fire had been cold for several hours. "Cold and bitter," he said, "slightly ashy underneath, a dryness to it." The elder's expression did not change. He closed the vial and opened the second one. This one was different, sweeter at the surface, with something beneath it that was not sweet at all, something that Solon could only describe as sharp, in the way that a certain kind of cold is sharp, not temperature but quality, a precision to it. He said this. The elder listened without responding. The third vial had almost no scent, but what it had was exactly as specific as the others. A green quality, like the inside of a stem broken at the joint, wet and vegetal, and carrying underneath it a faint heaviness that sat differently from the dryness of the first one, or the sharpness of the second. By the 5th vial, Solon's descriptions had become more detailed and more certain. By the 6th, he was describing things he should not have been able to perceive at all at the concentration involved, trace elements of the preparation method, a faint residue of whatever material the vial itself had once held before its current contents. The elder closed the 6th vial and stood for a long moment looking at Solon, with the expression of a person doing complicated arithmetic. "Sit down," the elder said. There was only one chair in this section of the vault, the small stool Solon used during long cataloging sessions. He sat. The elder did not sit. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, and looked at Solon in the measuring way that Solon had only seen him use when looking at the vials themselves. "What I just opened," the elder said, "would have incapacitated an ordinary person within seconds. The concentration at which I held them was low enough that you would have received only a trace, but a trace is sufficient to cause a response in someone without resistance. You show no response. You have, instead, demonstrated that you can perceive and characterize these substances with a precision I did not expect." Solon said nothing. "This is a known ability," the elder said. "It is documented in the old records as occurring in a very small percentage of Omega-designated individuals. It is called poison memory. The body does not metabolize the toxin in the usual sense. It absorbs it, neutralizes it, and stores the precise signature of it in a form that the memory can access indefinitely. Every substance you encounter from this point forward will be permanently catalogued in your own cognition, with complete accuracy. You will not forget a single one." He paused. "This makes you exceptionally useful to me," he said. Solon kept his breathing even. He kept his face the same way he always kept it, still, measured, the face of a person who is listening carefully and thinking very little. It was the face his father's household had always read as simple and unremarkable. It was his most valuable piece of equipment. "What would you like me to do?" he asked. "Continue your work in the vault," the elder said. "I will bring you additional materials for testing at scheduled intervals. You will not discuss this with any other member of the household. You will report your observations only to me, directly, when I ask for them." "Yes," Solon said. The elder picked up his case and left. Solon sat on the stool for a long while after the door closed. He sat without moving and thought through what had just happened, from the moment the vial slipped from his fingers to the moment the elder said the words, "exceptionally useful," and picked up his case and left. And he thought about each of those moments with the full precision that his mind gave to things he needed to understand completely. He had a gift. He had always had it, he supposed, in its most basic form: the unusually accurate memory, the tendency to retain things other people allowed to fade, the way he could read a page once and have it. But this was not that. This was something much larger than a good memory. This was an absorption, the body taking something in, the mind cataloging it with a completeness that left no room for approximation, and the knowledge arriving not through study but through experience, as though the substance itself carried its own explanation. He could already describe the 6 vials from this afternoon, with complete accuracy. Every aspect. Not just what he had perceived during the testing, but what he knew about each one now, as he sat on the stool with his gloves in his lap, thinking. He knew the precise mechanism of the first vial, not because anyone had told him, but because his mind had assembled the mechanism from the substance's properties, the way a craftsman assembles a piece of furniture from its materials, without needing instructions. He knew the second, the third, all 6. He had not yet decided what to do with this. The elder had described it as a known ability, documented in old records, occurring rarely. This meant the elder had known what to look for. He had been watching for it. That much was clear from the case he had brought. The 6 vials already prepared and waiting for the moment the test could be run. He had bought Solon at an auction, knowing his designation and his age and nothing else. And he had waited 3 weeks for the accident that would tell him whether the ability was present. Which meant the elder had been in this position before, had sought this ability before, had known what to look for because he had looked for it before, or because he had done his research before coming to the auction and knew what to wait for. He had a gift that was, in this particular place, in this particular situation, extraordinarily dangerous to possess. The elder had described it as useful. People who were useful were kept. He had known this from his father's house, but he had also learned, from the button in the alcove, from the 91 days since the last entry in the vault catalog, from the way Nora's eyes had moved when she first said the word vault, that being kept was not the same as being safe. People in this place were kept until they were not. The transition from one state to the other was apparently regular and quietly managed, and the timeline, he now knew, was approximately 90 days. He had been here 22 days. The elder would use him for as long as the ability was useful and novel. At some point, the data collected would be sufficient. At that point, the 90-day clock became the relevant fact. He stopped this line of thinking before it produced only weight without direction. He stood. He pulled on his gloves. He had an afternoon of cataloging that he had committed to, and the most important visible thing he could do in this moment was to be exactly that, a person who was simply doing his cataloging. He went back to the shelves. But in the deep archive of his mind, which was always running whether anything was happening or not, something had reorganized itself. 3 weeks of observation had produced a collection of facts without a structure. The morning's events had given him the structure. He now understood what kind of place this was, and what role he occupied in it, and understanding these things meant understanding that he needed a different kind of knowledge than what the catalog and the personnel records and the observation of meal table habits had been producing. He needed to understand the vault's purpose, not its contents, those he was building, one testing session at a time, toward a complete picture. Its purpose. Why a person would spend decades acquiring hundreds of sealed compounds in a room 2 levels underground, what the intended use of all of this was, and when. He ran his gloved finger along the shelf edge and thought about the lower vault, the half staircase he had not yet descended. He had delayed the lower level deliberately, wanting to understand the upper level first. He now had 11 observations logged. He had a working picture of the upper vault's layout and condition. Tomorrow, he decided, tomorrow he would go down. The testing sessions happened every 3 days. The elder arrived without prior announcement, carrying a flat case whose contents varied from session to session, but whose purpose was always the same. He would open the case, arrange the vials, and hold each one near Solon in sequence. Solon would describe what he perceived. The elder listened and wrote. The elder never explained afterward what any of the substances were. He never offered the context that would have allowed Solon to cross-reference his perceptions against known information. The sessions were designed to extract data without providing any. Solon understood this. He gave the elder complete and accurate descriptions for every session, and kept the most important part entirely to himself. What the elder was not being told was the depth of what Solon could actually do. The elder knew Solon could perceive and characterize substances with unusual precision. He did not know that Solon could, at any point after a single exposure, reproduce the complete chemical profile of any substance he had ever encountered, with the same accuracy, the same detail, the same total recall as the moment of first contact. He did not know that this recall included not just the sensory experience, but something much deeper, an understanding of the substance's mechanism, its behavior in living tissue, the pathways through which it produced its effects. This understanding did not come from study. It came with the memory itself, as though absorption and comprehension were the same process. Solon had been testing this quietly for 2 weeks. Between cataloging sessions, alone in the vault with his gloves on and the shelves all around him, he would recall a substance from the first testing session and sit with its complete profile in his mind, turning it over, the way a person turns a stone in their hand, examining it from every angle, understanding not just what it was, but what it would do, and in what quantity, and in what time, and against what. He found the same clarity waiting for him every time he reached for it. The archive was complete, and always accessible. He was not going to tell the elder any of this. He had understood, from the moment he sat down on the stool after the first session, and thought carefully about his position, that his safety in this place was directly connected to how much the elder thought he knew about him. A tool fully understood was a tool that could be managed and discarded on a known schedule. A tool whose depth was uncertain was a tool that required more careful handling. He kept his sessions with the elder consistent, accurate but limited. He described what a person with poison memory at a moderate level would describe. He was careful never to go further than the last session had established, never to suggest that what he could do in session 3 was more refined than what he had done in session 1. He was building, in the elder's notebook, a portrait of an ability with a clear ceiling. The portrait was accurate in every detail. The ceiling was entirely invented. Between sessions, he practiced in the only way available to him, by going still in the vault and reaching into his archive. He would select a substance from a recent session and hold its complete profile in his attention, turning it through every angle of understanding he had, not just the compound itself, but what it would do if introduced to a different compound on the testing list, what the combination would produce, and what someone who understood the combination fully could do with it. He did this without moving, without any external sign, looking for all the world like someone standing at a shelf, thinking about an entry in a catalog. The archive answered every time he reached for it. The answers were always complete. There was no ceiling. The sessions, by the 7th, had given him profiles for 31 different substances. He knew each one, as completely as he had known the first 6 from the morning of the vial incident. He knew what each would do, to whom, in what quantity, over what span of time, and with what observable evidence afterward. He knew which ones could be introduced through air, which through contact, which through ingestion, which through combination with another substance on the list. He knew which ones left traces that a thorough examination would find, and which ones left nothing a standard examination would catch. He carried all of this in the permanent archive of his mind, available at any moment he chose to reach for it, organized with the same precision he gave to the vault's physical catalog. He had, over the course of 7 testing sessions, been handed an extraordinary and detailed education in the elder's collection. The elder believed he was building a data record. He was also, unknowingly, building Solon's. In the 4th testing session, the elder had introduced what he called a layered compound, 2 substances prepared together, in a ratio that made them, in combination, different from either element alone. He held the vial near Solon's left hand, which was gloved, and waited. Solon breathed carefully and described what he perceived, the 2 components separately, and then the combined quality they produced, and then 3 properties of that combined quality that had no simple language because they were not things that had been named before. The elder wrote for longer than usual after that description. His writing slowed in the way writing slows when the hand is trying to keep up with a mind that has received more than it expected. Solon had noted this and said nothing. On the 6th session, 3 weeks after the vial incident, the elder had introduced something Solon recognized immediately, a substance from the 3rd session, its profile already complete and fully stored in his archive. The recognition arrived before the scent did. He described it exactly as he would describe a new substance, varying the phrasing just enough from his third session account to avoid the suspicious pattern of identical words, while giving the same accurate information. The session proceeded normally. The elder made his notations and left. Afterward, Solon stood in the vault and thought about what the repeat test meant. There were two explanations. The elder had introduced the same substance accidentally, possible, if he was working from a large pool without careful tracking, or the elder had introduced it deliberately, to test whether Solon would reveal recognition of a previously encountered compound. The second explanation was more consistent with what Solon knew of the elder. He filed this observation and continued working. He had also, during the same period, been reading the vault's administrative records with systematic care. The administrative cabinet contained not just the main catalog, but a full set of supporting documents, inspection logs, acquisition correspondence, and the household personnel records, organized by role and duration. He had been working through them in the last 20 minutes of each afternoon session, in the poorest light, at the angle of the cabinet that was most naturally explained by the ordinary need to return items to storage. The inspection logs were the most immediately useful. They covered 12 years, and they described, with Nora Wynn's characteristic brevity, the state of the vault at the end of each weekly session. He had read 4 years of them in the course of 3 weeks, and what emerged from them was a pattern. The inspection records showed no change in the lower vault entries, ever. Every single week, for 4 years, the lower vault entries read, "Condition unchanged, no new items, no items removed." Not because the lower vault was never accessed. He had already found the residue in empty brackets upstairs that suggested recent movements, but because the lower vault's condition records were maintained separately, in a document that was not in this cabinet. He had looked for it, he had not found it, which told him that the separate lower vault record was kept somewhere else, by someone else, or by the elder himself. The acquisition correspondence was interesting in a different way. The elder's suppliers were described only by code names. No real names, no addresses, no location indicators beyond a regional designation that suggested multiple sources across the territory. The compounds arrived in sealed shipments, with no identifying markers beyond their catalog codes. The correspondence itself was in the elder's handwriting, spare and specific, never explaining the purpose of any order, only the specifications. Reading it, Solon understood that the elder had spent decades building a system in which no single supplier knew more than a fragment of what was being assembled. Compartmentalization as a method, silence as a structure. The personnel records were organized by role. He found the vault attendance section on a single page near the back of the most recent record book, written in Nora Wynn's small, precise hand. Names and assignment dates, each with a departed notation beside it. He read the list carefully. 14 names over 12 years. He calculated the interval between each person's assignment and departure date. The intervals were not identical. They varied by a handful of days in each direction, but every single one of them fell within a range of 85 to 95 days. 14 people, 14 intervals, every one between 85 and 95 days. He stood in the vault's afternoon light and looked at the list for a moment that was slightly longer than his usual reading pace, then closed the record book and returned it to its position, with the same care he gave to everything. That evening, he sat at the staff table and counted the days since his arrival. 31. He had, if the pattern held, somewhere between 54 and 64 days remaining. He ate without looking up from his bowl and ran through everything he had gathered against everything he still did not know, and the gap was larger than he wanted, and the time was smaller than he needed. He needed people who were in the same position, owned by this manner, aware that something was wrong, capable of clear thinking under pressure. He had been watching the table for weeks. He had identified 3 candidates. He had done nothing, because he had told himself he was still building the picture. He could not afford to keep doing that. He thought about what he actually knew about each of the 3. Pelmarsh had been here for 3 years. He worked in the library, which gave him access to the elder's archiving systems and the outgoing correspondence before it was sealed. Solon had spent 4 weeks mapping Pell's movements and reading his behavioral patterns at the table, and what he had concluded was this: Pell was not someone who reacted. He was someone who observed and then held what he observed until he had somewhere to put it. The tension in Pell's shoulders was not fear managing itself. It was information managing itself, in a person who had not yet found the right conversation. The ink on his hands was always in two places, the regular writing position and the index finger of his right hand, which was the position of a person who ran their finger along lists, catalog entries perhaps, or correspondence records, looking for patterns. Pell had been building a picture of his own for 3 years. Solon needed to know what was in it. Cress Farrow had been here for 4 years. She ran the kitchen, which meant she controlled what entered this manor through its food supply. More importantly, she had access to the preparation room off the main corridor, the room whose contents never appeared in the kitchen records, and whose connection to the ventilation system had been, until this week, a detail Solon had noted, but not fully understood. Cress was careful. She was also angry, in the contained, steady way that people became angry when they had been in an unjust situation long enough that the anger had moved past the stage of heat and into the stage of solid clarity. 4 years was long enough. She had been watching this manor for 4 years, and she had been counting things without anyone knowing she was counting, and what she had counted was almost certainly worth knowing. Leon Dove was the most important of the three, and the most carefully defended. She had been here for 2 years, the shortest tenure of the group, but the most information-rich. As the manor's healer, she had access to medical records for the permanent staff, and to the medical room adjacent to the elder's private study, which put her in proximity to a set of materials that were relevant in ways Solon was beginning to understand. She kept a notebook. She carried it inside her coat every time she left a room that was not her own, which meant the notebook contained something she would not leave unguarded. She wrote in it every evening in the staff common room, in the precise, systematic way of someone documenting rather than journaling. Medical professionals documented things they did not yet know what to do with, against the day when they would know. He had 3 people, each with different access and different knowledge. He had 54 to 64 days. He needed to move. He went to his room that evening and thought carefully about sequence. He would approach Cress first, because the kitchen gave her the most visible and immediate connection to the vault's deployment mechanism, and because 4 years of accumulated observation made her the most ready. Pell second, because what Pell carried, connect the Elder's activity to its outcomes, in ways Solon needed confirmed. Leon last, because the medical records she had been keeping were the most dangerous piece of information in this building after the lower vault itself, and reaching her, at the wrong moment, in the wrong way, would close a door that could not be reopened. He worked through the approach for each one, not as a plan with steps, but as a question of timing and language. What to say first, what to hold back, when to show enough to prompt someone else to show what they were holding. The same precision he applied to the vault's catalog. By the time he slept, he had it. Tomorrow, he decided, he would begin. He descended the half staircase on a Tuesday morning, having told himself he was simply completing the catalog coverage, which was entirely true, and having said nothing to Cecil about his plans for the morning session, which was also true, and carried a completely different kind of weight. The air changed as he went down. Not dramatically, the upper vault was already cold and dry, but subtly, in the specific way that air changes when it has been sealed in a smaller space, with less circulation for a longer period. The light here was different too. The upper vault's lamps were evenly placed, producing a consistent illumination. The lower vault's lamps were set differently, further apart, with a quality that left the ends of each row slightly dimmer than the center, as though whoever had designed this space had wanted someone who came down here to be aware, at all times, of where the visible zone ended. The shelving was different, darker wood, treated with something that gave it a texture unlike the upper vault's smooth sealed surfaces. The brackets holding the vials were heavier, closer together, designed for larger containers, and the vials themselves were larger, on average, than anything he had catalogued above, not dramatically, but notably, the difference in volume that a person who had spent weeks handling specific sizes could read immediately. There were fewer of them, perhaps 80, perhaps 90. He opened the catalog to the lower vault section and moved to the first row, G section, beginning with item G14, which was the first entry on the first page of the lower vault index. He noted the position number, noted the item description, looked at the corresponding vial to confirm its location and condition, and then he looked again at the catalog entry. The entry for item G14 read, Compound G14. Contents, see restricted addendum. Location, lower vault, section G, position 14. Condition, sealed. And beside the condition entry, where every other vial in the catalog had a description, there was only a small handwritten note in ink, different from the main catalog text. It said, "See attached list." He stood very still and read it twice. He had not noticed any attached list. He checked the back of the catalog page, checked the following page, found nothing. He went to the front of the catalog and checked the index carefully, section by section. There was no entry for any attached list. He returned to the G section and read the entry for G14 a third time, exactly as it appeared, word by word. The notation, "See attached list," was written in a hand different from the main catalog entries. Different pen, different pressure, different ink shade. Wower, darker, newer. It had been added to the entry after the main entry was written. Someone had gone through this catalog at some point and added the same notation to every single lower vault entry, which meant there had been a time, before that addition was made, when the lower vault entries had a different description, or no description at all beyond the catalog code. And then, at a specific moment, someone, presumably the elder, given the position of these records, had decided to redirect every lower vault entry to an attached list that was not kept with this catalog. Why would you separate the list from the catalog? Because the list was more sensitive than the catalog. Because the catalog was seen by whoever maintained it, in this case, the series of vault attendants, all of whom had been here for approximately 90 days. The attached list, kept elsewhere, was seen by no one who was not meant to see it. He moved to G15, same notation. G16, same notation. He moved along the row without hurrying, checking each entry with his finger moving down the page. Every single vial in G section had the same notation, "See attached list." He closed the catalog and checked his own posture and breathing. Both were normal. He reopened the catalog and moved to H section. H section. Same notation on every vial. I section. Same. J section. K section. L section. He covered the entire lower vault catalog in 30 minutes, moving with the steady, systematic attention of someone doing routine work, and by the end of it he had confirmed that every single entry in the lower vault referred to an attached list that did not appear anywhere in the catalog he was holding. He stood at the end of the L row and looked at the space around him with the precise, focused attention he gave to things that were important. The upper vault was organized by type, by compound category, by preparation method. He had understood this in the first week of work. The organization had a logic that a person familiar with chemistry and classification could follow. The structure was the structure of a collection, arranged for reference and retrieval. Now, looking at the lower vault, he understood that it was organized differently. The logic here was not the logic of a collection. He had been looking for compound categories and preparation groupings, and he had not found them. And now he understood why he had not found them. The organization was not based on what the vials contained. It was based on something else entirely. He spent a few minutes at the end of the L row simply looking at the layout. The sections were not equal in size. G was the largest, with 23 vials, and L was the smallest, with 6. The brackets were uniformly spaced within each section, but the sections themselves varied. If he assumed the sections represented some kind of grouping, then the grouping produced unequal group sizes, which in turn suggested the grouping was not an arbitrary division, but a meaningful one. Grouped by what? Not geography. He recognized names from at least 4 different regions across the sections he had scanned. Not by role. He had seen counselors and military figures in the same section. Grouped by something he did not yet have the reference document to decode. The attached list, wherever it was kept, held that logic. Without it, he had the names but not the plan for their sequencing. He was going to need that list. He did not yet know where it was or how to reach it. He knew it existed. He knew it was the missing component. He added it to the list of things he needed to find, and he moved back to G14 and looked at its label more carefully, tilting the vial toward the nearest lamp. The label did not have a compound name on it. It had a personal name. He set the vial back in its position, with the same careful hands he used for every item in this vault. He moved to G15 and looked at its label. Another name, 2 initials and a surname, in the same small and precise format as G14. He moved to G16. Another name. He moved along the row at a steady pace, not rushing, reading each label with the same attention. his mind storing each one as it read it, adding each to the growing list that was assembling itself in his permanent archive. Names. Every single label in this lower vault was a name, not a compound, not a chemical description, not a catalog number, a person's name. He was 3/4 of the way through the G row when he found the three that made him go completely and absolutely still. The label on one vial read, G. Ashwick. The label on the one directly next to it read, V. Ashwick. The label on the one next to that read, O. Ashwick. He looked at the 3 vials. He did not touch them. He read each label a second time, slowly, with the care of someone confirming information they have already received and do not wish to have confirmed. Gerald Ashwick, Vera Ashwick, Owen Ashwick, his father, his mother, his brother. He made himself breathe at a normal rate. He made himself stand for a moment, exactly as he would stand at any other point in this room, with the catalog open, and his hands in their gloves, and his posture, the posture of someone doing routine work. He looked at the 3 vials the way he looked at every vial in this room, checking the seal, checking the fill level, checking the condition, sealed, full, undisturbed, properly stored, nothing to note. He continued to the end of the row. He continued to H row, and I row, and JKL. He finished the lower vault in a methodical sweep that took the rest of the morning, reading every label on every vial, storing every name, and doing it with the exterior behavior of someone who had found everything exactly as the catalog indicated it should be. When he was done, he had 84 names in his mind's list. He recognized approximately 30 of them, not from personal contact but from his reading, the names that appeared in the capital's published records, in the accounts of governing bodies, in the correspondence lists of the realm's significant institutions, councilors, governors, heads of the large commercial concerns that moved food and material through the territory, senior figures in the military administration, the owners of land that controlled water, road access, passage through mountain territory. These were not simply powerful people. They were the people whose positions made the governance of the realm function at its highest level. Every single one whose removal would create a specific and significant shift in who controlled something important. Of the 30 he recognized, 14 held positions that would, if vacated in close sequence, produce a concentrated shift in governing authority. 14 vacancies in the right positions could redirect effective control of the realm's 3 major institutions toward whoever was positioned to fill them, or toward whoever had already arranged for them to be filled. He thought about the acquisition correspondence in the administrative cabinet, the decades of careful, compartmentalized orders, each supplier knowing only a fragment, no one supplier holding the full picture. He thought about the way the lower vault's catalog notation said, "See attached list," and pointed to a document that did not exist anywhere he could find, which meant it was kept separately, in a location he had not yet accessed, by a person or persons who were not him. He thought about the grand convening that Pell would eventually find in the archive, and which he did not yet know about, and which was 6 weeks away. He noted, as he completed his count, that the names were not grouped alphabetically, or by territory, or by institution. They appeared to be grouped by something else, a logic that was not visible in the labels themselves, but that might be visible in the attached list he had not yet found. He replaced every vial with the care he gave to everything. He straightened every bracket to its original angle. He checked each row for evidence of his passage, and found none. He was thorough about this in the way a person is thorough when they understand that the evidence of their passage must not exist. Then he climbed the stairs and went back to the upper vault and resumed his ordinary cataloging work. His face was the same as always when he emerged from the vault that evening and walked through the corridor to the staff dining room, still unremarkable. The face of a person who had spent the day doing careful and specific work without incident. Inside, something had reorganized itself. Not as an emotion, but as a change in the structure of his thinking, the way a map changes when a new road appears that makes the existing roads legible in a completely different way. The lower vault was not additional inventory, it was the purpose. Everything in the upper vault was the resource. The lower vault was the plan. This vault was not a collection. It was a weapon system, organized, prepared, calibrated to specific individual targets, with 84 distinct objectives labeled in plain text, on glass vials, in a locked room, 2 levels below the ground floor of a mountain manor, belonging to a man who had purchased Solon at an auction 7 weeks ago and put him in charge of this rune's care. His family's names were in this weapon system. 3 vials, 3 initials, 3 people who had put him on a platform with his wrists bound and driven away without looking back. He thought about this carefully and arrived at the same conclusion he had been approaching since the moment he understood what he was looking at. This was not about his family. This was about 84 names, and his family was 3 of them. And what mattered was not the 3, but the full scope of what the 84 revealed. He ate his meal. He noted, without appearing to note, the details of the table. The ink on Pell's right hand in a location that meant large format writing. The fresh burn on Cress's forearm that meant distraction or hurry in the kitchen. The absence of Leon's notebook from her coat that meant she had left it somewhere other than her usual place. 3 signals, all in one evening, from 3 people who were each carrying a piece of something he needed to understand before he could decide what to do with it. He was not going to act on sentiment. His family had made their calculation. He had been the result of that calculation. That chapter was closed. What was not closed was the question of what someone was planning to do with 84 sealed vials, and an occasion that brought the realm's most powerful figures under one roof. That question was open, and the time he had to answer it was specific and limited and growing shorter with each day that passed. After dinner, he lay on his cot and thought carefully through everything he had. The vault's compound profiles building in his memory, the 90-day pattern in the personnel records, the 3 people at the table who each carried a different fragment of the picture he needed to complete. He thought about all of it with the focused attention that was the only thing he had always been certain he possessed, and he decided what the first step was. He thought about the burn on Cress Pharaoh's forearm, about the notebook Leon Dove had left somewhere unusual, about the ink on Pell Marsh's hand, in a different place than usual. Tomorrow, he decided, he would begin. Solon did not walk up to Cress Pharaoh and say what he needed to say. He was not naive enough to believe that trust could be built that quickly, or that directly. Instead, on the morning after he finished the lower vault, he made a point of arriving at breakfast 4 minutes earlier than usual, which placed him in the kitchen doorway, at exactly the moment Cress was finishing the preparations for the morning meal, and had a few minutes of relative quiet before anyone else arrived. He asked her if there was anything he could carry to the table. She looked at him with the flat assessment he had come to expect from the people in this manner. The look that said, "I am measuring exactly how much to trust this, and the answer is currently not much." Then she handed him a basket of bread without comment. He carried it to the table, set it down, and went back to the kitchen door. "Is there anything else?" he asked. "No," she said. He nodded and went to sit down. He did the same thing the next morning, and the morning after that. On the 4th morning, Cress looked at him when he appeared in the kitchen doorway and said, without expression, "There's a pot on the back burner that needs watching." He watched it. He stirred it when it needed stirring, and took it off the heat at exactly the right moment, which he knew, because he had watched Cress work for 3 weeks, and understood her kitchen timing, as well as he understood anything else in this manner. She said nothing about it. But she did not tell him to stop coming. By the 2nd week of these quiet mornings, he had established enough of a pattern that standing near Cress in the kitchen felt unremarkable. By the 3rd week, they had exchanged enough small, practical words that a conversation was no longer an anomaly. And on a gray morning when the first real snow of the season was coming down outside, and the kitchen was warmer than usual, because Cress had needed the oven running early, he stood next to her at the work table and said, quietly enough that no one passing in the corridor would hear, "How long have you been here?" She did not stop what she was doing. 4 years, she said. And before that? She paused for just a moment, the way people pause when they decide whether to answer a question. "The same as you," she said. He understood she meant the auction. He nodded. He picked up a cloth and folded it, and set it on the stack she was working from, and said nothing more about it. But 2 days later, she looked at him across the kitchen, while they were both working, and said, "There are things in this place I don't understand." She said it the way people say things when they have been holding them for a long time, and the weight has finally reached a limit. "So do I," he said. That was the beginning. He did not tell her everything immediately. He told her portions, carefully selected, in the order that made sense for building a shared picture, rather than simply depositing all of his knowledge at once. He told her first about the 90-day pattern in the personnel records, the previous vault attendants and their departure dates, the regularity of the interval. He watched her face as she listened. She did not show surprise. She showed the particular, controlled expression of someone who has just had a thing they suspected confirmed by someone else, and who is deciding whether the confirmation makes their situation better or worse. Then he told her what the lower vault's labels looked like. She stopped what she was doing in the kitchen and looked at the work table and was quiet. He did not yet tell her about the 3 Ashwick vials. He did not tell her about his ability. He told her only the structural facts, the lower vault's organization, the names as labels, the absence of any attached list in the catalog. What he did tell her, with complete precision, was that the vault was not a collection, it was a system. She listened without interrupting until he was done. Then she said, carefully, "The kitchen receives orders for things that don't go into any meal I prepare. Specific ingredients, in specific quantities, sent to the preparation room off the main corridor. I've been recording what goes in and what doesn't come back out for 2 years. I thought at first the elder had an unusual private diet. After the first 3 months I stopped thinking that." He understood immediately what this described. A delivery mechanism. A way of introducing something into another medium for a purpose that the kitchen was not supposed to understand. He kept his face neutral. "What does the preparation room connect to?" "The ventilation system," she said, "and the laundry, and the private drinks service." He filed each of these, 3 additional vectors he had not yet mapped. He thanked her and said nothing more that morning. He did not want to push farther than the conversation had naturally reached. Trust built at the right pace held. Trust built too fast collapsed. Pelmarsh was a different challenge. He was more self-contained than Cress, more consistently guarded, more aware of the manor as an environment to be navigated carefully. Solon spent 2 weeks doing nothing more than being consistently present in Pell's peripheral field without demanding anything, appearing in the library corridor when Pell arrived, exchanging a few words when Pell was leaving, asking once about a title he had seen on the library's catalog in a way that was genuine and required Pell to answer from actual knowledge of the collection. Pell responded to each of these with minimal but real engagement. He was measuring. Solon let him measure and continued to give him nothing surprising. The opening came on an evening when Solon passed the library door and found Pell standing in the dark at his window, not reading, not working, simply standing in the particular stillness of someone who has been standing there for a while. Solon knocked on the open door. Pell turned. "I didn't mean to interrupt," Solon said. "You didn't," Pell said. He looked at the window again briefly, then back at Solon. "Do you ever think about why the Elder's correspondence takes the specific form it does?" It was the most direct question anyone in this manner had asked him. "Tell me what you mean," he said. Pell had been archiving the Elder's outgoing correspondence for 3 years, because his role extended to document management, and the correspondence passed through his hands before it was sealed. He had not been reading the content. He was not supposed to read the content. But the patterns of address, timing, and response were visible in the archiving process. And over 3 years he had noted the following. The Elder wrote to powerful people, specifically, to people in significant positions, and those people, within roughly a year of receiving a letter from the Elder, were no longer in those positions. Some died, some resigned under circumstances that Pell had found, on quiet reflection, difficult to explain as natural. Some simply disappeared from the public correspondence, and then reappeared in notices that described them as no longer holding their former role. The pattern was consistent. The timing was consistent. Pell had not mentioned it to anyone for 3 years, because he had not known what he was looking at, exactly, only that it was something, and something in this manner was the kind of thing you did not bring to Cecil Holt or Hugo Crane. Solon told him what the lower vault's labels said. Pell sat down on the edge of his desk and was quiet. His hands rested on the surface of the desk with a stillness that was not calm, but the opposite of calm. The stillness of a person who has stopped moving because they are using all of their attention to process something. "How many names?" he asked, after a long pause. 84, Solon said, "and 43 of them appear, by my cross-reference, in the capital's public governance records from the last 5 years. Pell looked up at him. 43, who are currently in their positions. "Yes," Solon said. Pell was quiet again for a moment. Then he said, very quietly, The archive has a reference to a grand convening. I found it 3 months ago, and I didn't know what to do with it. They talked for another hour, and when Solon left the library, he had more than he had come with. The approach to Lian Dove was the most careful of the three. Her role as healer gave her access to records that could directly document what the Elder's Vault produced in the world, which meant she was both the most valuable person to reach and the most dangerous to approach incorrectly. She was also, of the three, the most privately defended, not hostile, not closed in the aggressive sense, but defended in the way that a person is defended, who has decided that keeping things inside was the only reliable safety they had. He found his opening through patient, consistent presence in the staff common room during the evenings. He sat there and read, and did not make conversation, and was simply there, evening after evening, until being there was unremarkable. When Lian looked up from her notebook one evening and said, "You read a lot," he answered simply, and showed her what he was reading. The cover of the Vault's supplementary reference material on compound interactions was identifiable to a medical professional immediately. She looked at it for a long moment, and then looked at him. "All of it," he said, answering her unasked question, "including the lower level." She closed her notebook and held it with both hands. What moved through her expression was not fear. It was the focused, medical professional attention of someone assessing a situation for what it actually was. He told her about the names. He told her about the 3 delivery mechanisms Cress had described. He told her the structural picture of what the vault was for. He did not tell her about his own ability. He did not tell her about the family vials. He told her what she needed to know in order to tell him what she needed to tell him, and then he waited. She was quiet for longer than either Cress or Pell had been. Then she opened her notebook and turned it to a page she had clearly gone to before. It was a list in her small, precise hand. Names, dates, a column of cause of death notations. She had been keeping it for over 2 years. She had known what she was recording, but had not been able to see how to use it. He read the list. He recognized 12 names from the vault labels. 12 deaths, documented, in the 2 years she had been keeping records. Natural causes, accidents. Each one consistent with nothing suspicious, unless you already knew what to look for. 42 entries, she said, and there are more than 80 names on the labels downstairs. Yes, he said. She understood what that meant. The silence between them lasted for only a moment before she said, "What do you need from me?" That was the question he had been waiting for, not from fear or desperation, but with the direct and practical engagement of a person who had made a decision. He told her what he needed. He would tell her more, as he understood it better. She nodded and closed her notebook. The following evening, all 4 of them met for the first time in the library's small storage room at the back of the archive level. A room Pell had identified as reliably unmonitored because the Manor's weekly schedule never brought anyone past it on evenings. Pell had checked this against the maintenance and duty records, which he had access to as part of his archiving role. They stood in the small room, and Pell put a piece of paper on the shelf and said, "Grand Convening, 6 weeks." He had found a full reference in the Elder's older archive, a record of the previous convening, 10 years prior, and the correspondence that surrounded it. The Elder hosted a gathering of the realm's most powerful figures once per decade, an invitation that could not reasonably be declined. An event hosted in private, away from the capital, in this specific, controlled location. Solon looked at each of them. Cress, with her steady hands and her eyes clear. Pell, precise and present. Lian, holding her notebook. He thought about the 84 names. He thought about what the gathering 10 years ago had produced, cross-referenced against Lian's list. He thought about the vault's lower level and the specific organization of its contents and what 6 weeks meant in the context of everything else. "We need the exact plan," he said, "not the general shape of it, the specific details. What happens at what point and through which mechanism?" No one disagreed. Outside the storage room, the Manor was quiet. The Elder was in his study. The grand convening was 6 weeks away, and the vault was waiting with its 84 names, in alphabetical order on glass vials, in a cold room, 2 levels underground. Solon thought about how much could change in 6 weeks, if 6 weeks were used correctly. It turned out to be enough time. The tension in the Manor over the following 2 weeks was the kind that had no visible source. Nothing changed in the schedule. Nothing changed in any conversation Solon was part of. The elder came to the vault for testing sessions on the same 3-day interval as always, opened the same kind of cases, listened to the same kind of descriptions. Cecil Holt moved through the corridors with the same clipped efficiency. Hugo Crane maintained his position near the main entrance with the same blank alertness. But something was different. Solon felt it in the way the elder watched him at the end of the last testing session. Not the intellectual interest of someone studying an ability, but something more specific and more calculating. And he felt it, 2 days later, in the way the evening meal tasted. He was 4 bites into his dinner when he caught it. Not the food itself. The food was fine. The preparation was Cress's as always, and he recognized every component of it. What he caught was something else. Something that should not have been there, woven into the broth with a precision that suggested it had been added after the kitchen, at some point in the serving process, in a quantity calibrated to be imperceptible under normal circumstances. He set down his spoon. He looked at his bowl. To his left, Pell was still eating. Across the table, Leanne had taken 2 more bites. Cress was not at the table. She was still in the kitchen, which meant she had not been exposed. He needed to think very quickly. He picked up his spoon and continued eating. He ate the rest of the bowl at normal pace. He breathed normally. He kept his expression exactly as it always was. What he had tasted was a compound he had been exposed to in one of the elder's testing sessions, 7 sessions ago. A slow-acting substance that suppressed certain functions over a period of 3 to 4 hours, not debilitating but disorienting, and distinguishable from ordinary fatigue only if you knew precisely what you were feeling for. The elder had described it during the session as a tool for assessing cognitive response time under mild impairment. Solon had catalogued it completely. His body had absorbed and neutralized it, as it did everything. The complete profile was in his memory. He understood now what the elder was doing. He was testing the servants at dinner, watching to see who showed an unusual response, who stayed sharp when they should have become slightly foggy, who did not react the way an exposed person should react. He had 2 hours before anyone would show symptoms, which gave him enough time. He excused himself from the table early, a thing he had done twice before, establishing it as an occasional habit rather than an anomaly. He went to the hallway near the east corridor, where a storage cupboard held the medical supplies that Leanne kept for minor household needs. He knew the cupboard's contents precisely, because he had spent an afternoon reading its contents under the guise of retrieving a bandage for a minor cut from working in the vault. He had what he needed. Over the next 40 minutes, in the quiet of the lower corridor, he assembled 3 small preparations from memory, working with the steady, economical movements of someone who had spent 5 months handling delicate glass and knew exactly what careful hands felt like. The cupboard had everything he required: a small set of measuring instruments, several base compounds stored for routine medical use, and the materials he needed to produce a neutralizing preparation that would clear the compound Pell and Leanne had ingested before it progressed to its full effect. He had never prepared anything like this before coming to this manor. He had learned to do it the same way he had learned everything since arriving, by absorbing information and turning it over in his mind until it became knowledge rather than simply data. He worked without hesitation and without error. When he was done, 3 cloth-wrapped preparations sat in his coat pocket, 1 for Pell, 1 for Leanne, 1 held in reserve. He put the cupboard back exactly as he had found it. Then he sat in his room and waited. He was not well, he told Nora when she passed his door at the hour when she typically checked the corridor. He said it with just enough expression to be believable, and just little enough to suggest he was minimizing, the way people did when they were genuinely unwell but did not want to cause a fuss. She noted it with her usual efficiency and moved on. When the corridor had been quiet for long enough, he moved. Pell's room was 2 doors down. He knocked twice in the specific pattern he and Pell had established. Not secret feeling, just ordinary enough to be overlooked. Pell opened the door with the slightly dazed expression of someone at the beginning edge of the compound's effect. "Take this," Solon said quietly, and put the first cloth-wrapped preparation in his hand. All of it, and quickly. Pell looked at it. He looked at Solon. He took it without asking questions, which was the thing Solon had always valued most about him. Leanne's room was on the other side of the building. He covered the distance quickly and knocked in the same pattern. When Leanne opened her door, she had already registered something was wrong. She was a healer, and she recognized the early signs of something introduced. She saw what he held, and her eyes sharpened with the focused attention of a professional who has identified a problem and is already thinking about the solution. "What was it?" she asked. "Slow-acting cognitive suppressant," he said. "From the testing sessions. Take this now. I'll explain fully in the morning." She took it without further questions and looked at him for one moment with an expression that said she had more to ask and that it would wait. He returned to his room and sat on the edge of the cot and thought carefully through the implications. The elder had introduced a compound into the staff meal. He had calibrated it to be imperceptible without specific knowledge of what to look for. Not deadly, not dramatic, just sufficient to produce a measurable change in cognitive function that would be visible to someone watching the table from a position of prepared observation. The test was not about harming anyone. It was about detecting whether any member of the household was operating with information they were not supposed to have. Hugo Crane had been in the corridor near the dining room entrance this evening. Solon had noted him there, but had not attached significance to the placement until now. Cecil Holt had passed through the dining room once during the meal, which was unusual. Two observers, in positions that gave them clear sightlines to the faces at the table. He lay on his cot and worked through what the elder would have seen. Solon had finished his meal at a normal pace, shown no unusual alertness, excused himself early as he had done twice before. He had gone to his room and reported mild illness to Nora. His behavior at every point was within his established pattern. Whatever Hugo Crane and Cecil Holt had been watching for, they would not have found it in anything Solon did. In the morning, all three of them were at breakfast on time and unremarkable. Pell had his folded pages. Leanne had her notebook inside her coat. Cress had not been at the meal. She had been in the kitchen throughout, and had therefore not been exposed. They all ate normally. They said the small, ordinary things that people said at a table, where no one spoke much. The elder walked through the dining room at the end of the meal. He rarely did this. Solon did not look at him directly. He watched in the peripheral field of his vision, and he saw the elder's gaze move across each face at the table in sequence. Not obviously, not with the transparency of someone checking, but with the particular, practiced quality of someone who had been doing this for a very long time and had made it look like nothing. He stopped for no one. He walked through and left. The elder's expression had given nothing away, but Solon had spent 5 months watching that face, and the nothing it gave away was a specific kind of nothing, the kind produced by a person who had looked and not found what they were looking for, and was deciding what to do next. The grand convening was 4 weeks away. That evening, in the library storage room, Solon told them what had happened. Cress had not been affected, having been in the kitchen throughout the meal service. She listened to the account with the still, precise attention of someone deciding how much danger they were in. "He's testing us," Pell said. "He's testing me specifically," Solon said. "He knows what I can do. He wants to know if I've been sharing that with anyone. If I'd tasted what he put in the food and done nothing about it, he'd have no evidence that I knew anything I shouldn't. But if anyone at that table showed an unusual response to a compound that should have been imperceptible, he'd know I'd told them what to look for." "And because no one showed a response," Leanne said, "he can't be certain." "He can't be certain," Solon agreed, "but he's watching more carefully now. Which means the window we have is smaller than we thought," Cress said. He looked at her. She was right. The convening was 4 weeks away, which had felt like enough time. It might still be enough time. But the elder was now actively suspicious, and that changed the margin. "We move faster," he said. He needed one specific thing: access to the elder's preparation schedule for the convening. The schedule would tell him exactly what was planned, what compounds were involved, and in what sequence they were to be deployed. Without it, he was working from the general shape of a plan. With it, he would have the specific details necessary to counter it point by point. The preparation schedule, Pell had told him, was kept in a document that the elder had handled personally during the last archive session, and had then returned to a cabinet in his private study. The private study was one of the rooms Solon was not cleared to enter. He lay on his cot that night and thought about this problem. He did not solve it that night. He solved it 3 days later, when Cecil Holt asked him, in his dry and practical way, to assist in moving several large archive boxes from the elder's study anteroom to the lower library level. The anteroom was 1 step removed from the study itself, but its door, when open, provided a clear sightline to the cabinet he needed. He moved boxes with efficient and unremarkable helpfulness, and memorized everything visible on the study side of the open door. The preparation schedule was in the second cabinet. He could see the cover of the document from where he was standing. He could not read it from that angle. He needed another opportunity. He got one, 6 days later, because he asked for it, carefully, practically, through Cecil, citing a cataloging need that required cross-referencing against the elders' acquisition records, which were kept in the anteroom. Cecil, whose view of Solon had settled into the comfortable category of reliable and unremarkable, saw no reason to refuse. He had 40 minutes in the anteroom. He spent 38 of them in full view of the corridor window, doing exactly the cataloging work he had described. He spent 2 minutes at the cabinet, with the door positioned to cover his angle, reading the preparation schedule. He did not take it. He did not need to. He read it once, completely, and his mind kept it. Every detail, every compound, every timing, every method of introduction. The convening was to last one evening. The compounds were to be introduced across 3 mechanisms: the food service, the air treatment that Kress had already identified, and a third that Solon had not known about until he read the schedule, the private drinks service, which was handled separately from the main kitchen and was reserved for the elder and the senior guests. The third mechanism was the one that mattered most to him, because the third mechanism was where the most concentrated compound was assigned, and the third mechanism was where the elder was planning to deliver the one dose that was not meant to look like anything, the one that was not an aerosol or a food additive or something diffused through a system, but a specific, direct, targeted delivery in a glass of wine at a specific point in the evening. Not to a guest, to no guest at all, to himself. The schedule listed the elder's own private reserve, a sealed decanter, kept in the vault annex, as the vehicle, and beside the entry for that compound, a compound Solon had been exposed to and had catalogued months ago, one of the more complex and unusual ones, capable of mimicking a specific natural cause at precisely the right dosage. Beside that entry, the elder had written, in his precise and careful hand, "See will, effective at ceremony end." Solon stood in the anteroom and understood what he was reading. The elder was not planning to poison his enemies at the convening. He was planning to poison himself. A controlled dose, managed to a specific effect, to be reversed afterward by the antidote that would be in the elder's own private medical supply. The point of it was to collapse during the gathering, to appear to be the victim, rather than the architect, and in the chaos of his apparent death, his people would move through the room, and the night would produce every outcome he had planned, attributed to the emotional disruption of the moment, and the elder would recover in private and emerge the following morning as the sole survivor of an evening that had very carefully arranged for there to be no survivors among his rivals. It was elegant. It was decades of planning in one evening. Solon returned to the vault catalog work with steady hands and a mind running faster than it had run since the day he first descended the lower staircase. He now knew exactly what was going to happen. He knew the timing. He knew the compounds. He knew every mechanism. He thought about the elder's private reserve in the vault annex. He thought about who had access to that annex. He had access. His vault clearance covered it. He thought about the compound the elder planned to use on himself, and the antidote the elder planned to use afterward. He thought about the full profile of both, clear and detailed in his memory. He thought about what would happen if the second compound, the antidote, was no longer where it was stored, or if the first compound was no longer what it appeared to be. He thought about this very carefully for a long time, and then he began to plan. The manor transformed in the 2 weeks before the grand convening, in the way that a place transforms when its true purpose is finally being used. The staff who were normally invisible became visible, moving through corridors with purpose, arriving with deliveries, carrying materials that Solon had never seen brought into this estate before. Cecil Holt appeared in places he did not normally appear: the East Wing, the main reception hall, the preparation room off the kitchen corridor, moving with the compressed energy of a person managing a timeline only he could see in full. The main reception hall, which Solon had passed every day for 5 months without ever seeing its doors open, was unlocked and cleaned and arranged with a thoroughness that suggested this room was what the entire manor had always been built to serve. Tables arrived from the estate's storage rooms. Chairs were brought up from a lower level Solon had not known existed. Linens were washed and pressed and folded in the laundry, with the kind of precision that only happened when Cecil Holt stood in the doorway and watched. The kitchen expanded to a scale of operation that made Cress's ordinary efficiency look relaxed. Deliveries arriving, fresh materials being cataloged in quantities that Solan noted carefully whenever he passed. Preparation beginning for multiple courses at multiple price points of quality and care. Solan moved through all of this with his usual unremarkable steadiness, helping when asked, staying out of the way when not, and cataloging everything he observed. He asked no unusual questions. He expressed no unusual interest. He was, visibly, exactly the same vault attendant he had been since the first morning. Underneath that surface, he was working faster than he had ever worked in his life. He had shared the preparation schedule's contents with the others 5 days after he read it. He had called the meeting in Pell's storage room on a night when Hugo Crane was occupied with security preparation for the incoming guest arrivals, and Cecil Holt was in his study reviewing lists. He had stood in front of Cress, Pell, and Leon, and told them everything on the schedule with the same precision he used to describe compounds to the elder, completely, specifically, in order, without softening any of it. He had told them the 3 mechanisms, the food, the air treatment, and the private drink service. He had told them the timing of each. He had told them the nature of the compounds involved, and what each was designed to do. He had told them about the elder's stage deterioration, and the intended outcome for the guests. He had told them everything except one thing. He had not told them about the substitution he intended to make in the elder's private reserve. This was not because he did not trust them. He had come further with these 3 people in 5 months than he would have thought possible, and he trusted their judgment, and their capacity, and their nerve, in a way that was specific and considered, not general. He had not told them, because the substitution was the kind of action that, once understood, changes the character of everything around it. He needed them to be completely focused on their own roles, without the weight of knowing that the final piece of the plan was being carried by one person alone. He would tell them afterward. There would be time for that. The roles he had assigned were these. Cress would handle the food service. She had full access to the meal preparation, from the kitchen to the table, and she knew every component of what the elder's schedule required, not just what was supposed to be in each dish, but what had to be in each dish for the schedule's sequence to work. Her task was to replace the scheduled compounds with preparations that looked and smelled and tasted identical in every way that a guest would notice, but which were entirely inert. She had spent 10 days preparing these substitutes under cover of expanded kitchen activity, working in the section of the kitchen not visible from the corridor window, at hours when the kitchen was otherwise empty. The materials she used had come from the vault's administrative cabinet, where small quantities of reference compounds were kept for calibration purposes. Solan had the authorization to handle them. He had, quietly and over several trips, prepared what she needed. Pell would handle the air treatment. The ventilation system's control points, which Cress had originally identified as connecting to the preparation room off the main corridor, had their primary adjustment mechanism in the lower library level, a fact that Pell had confirmed over several weeks of patient observation of the maintenance schedule. The adjustment Pell needed to make was not complicated. It required specific knowledge of the system's layout and a calm hand, and Pell had spent 3 years in this building's lower levels. He knew the library and its adjacencies better than anyone. His task was to reroute the ventilation sequence so that the compound intended for the reception hall would instead diffuse through the unused west section of the manor, where no guests would be. Leon would handle the private medical supply. As the manor's resident healer, she had standing access to the medical room adjacent to the elder's private study. This room held, among its standard contents, the reversals and antidotes maintained for emergency use, including the specific preparation the elder had arranged for his own recovery after his stage deterioration. Leanne's task was to ensure that preparation was no longer in its expected location when the elder needed it. She did not need to destroy it or replace it. She needed only to move it, and the medical room's organization gave her multiple options for where. What Solan himself would do was not yet in any conversation. He reviewed each person's plan with careful specificity over 3 separate meetings, each time going through every detail he could think of, every contingency that had occurred to him, every point at which something could go differently from what was expected. He asked questions. He listened to answers. When Cress raised a concern about the second service's timing, he adjusted. When Pell described an uncertainty about the ventilation's backup mechanism, he went to the lower library level himself, on the pretext of a research task, and confirmed what Pell had described, then returned with the specific details Pell needed. When Leanne asked about the elder's expected timeline for seeking the medical room, Solon told her with precision what the schedule indicated and what a reasonable margin of safety looked like. 4 days before the convening, they met for the last time, as a group in the storage room. He looked at each of them and felt something he did not have an easy word for, not warmth in any simple sense, and not sentimentality, but something in the category of recognition. These were 3 people who had been placed in the same position he had been placed in, by the same mechanism and for the same reason, because the world they lived in had decided they were property and had acted accordingly, and they had chosen, each in their own way, to be present and clear-eyed and useful, not to their assigned owner, but to the truth of what this place was and what it had been building toward. Each of you stays fully in your role for the entire evening, he said. Nothing changes in your visible behavior. You are where you are expected to be, doing exactly what you are expected to do. No one deviates from their established pattern at any moment. No one shows anything on their face that they have not been showing every other evening of the past several months. They nodded. He had learned to read the 3 of them, and what he read was, steady. The guests begin arriving at the 7th hour, he said. The schedule indicates the elder's own preparation will reach its active stage at approximately the 9th hour, during the latter portion of the main service. At that point, whatever we have done will either have worked, or it will not have. We will know. What does not working look like? Pell asked. He asked it in the direct and practical way that Solon had come to appreciate, not fear dressed as a question, but real planning. If something in our own preparations has gone wrong, Solon said, guests will begin showing responses that should not be happening. At that point, Leon's role shifts immediately to the practical management of medical responses. Cress's role shifts to identifying which element of the food service was not adequately neutralized. Pell will leave his station and come to the corridor as a signal to me. He paused. But this is not going to happen. I have checked every step of each preparation twice, and the only element I have not allowed any of you to check independently is the one I will handle myself. I am confident in all of them. He meant this. It was not the confidence of someone who had decided to feel confident because the alternative was too difficult. It was the confidence of someone who had spent 5 months in a vault learning to assess things precisely, who had built a mental archive of every variable in this plan, and who could not find the failure point because he had anticipated every one of them. He went to the vault annex on the morning, 2 days before the convening. The annex was a narrow room off the lower vault's main space, temperature-controlled, holding a small number of items that required specific storage conditions. The elder's private reserve was one of them, a sealed decanter, dark glass, set in a fitted case that kept it at the correct temperature and angle. Solon had legitimate access to this annex. He had been inside it 7 times over his 5 months in this role. His presence there was unremarkable. He set out his materials with the same careful attention he gave everything in this vault. He took his time. He worked without hurrying, because hurrying in a room like this was how mistakes were made, and the one thing he could not afford in this action was a mistake. The substitution he made was specific and complete, a compound he had constructed from memory, using elements sourced from the vault's reference supply over the past 2 weeks, assembled in the correct proportions, adjusted to the precise color and viscosity of the original. The compound he introduced was not the one the elder had planned for himself. It would produce a real effect rather than a staged one, and the antidote Leanne was removing from the medical room was the one that would have reversed the original preparation, not this one. He sealed the decanter exactly as it had been sealed. He replaced the case's lining to its original position. He checked the temperature indicator. He looked at the decanter from every angle a person inspecting it might use. It was perfect. There was no sign that anything had been done. He stood in the annex in the cold, dry air and thought about the button in the alcove and the 91 days and the 3 Ashwick vials. He thought about Felix Drummond reading a list of physical details about him to a room full of strangers while he stood on a platform and counted stones. He thought about the carriage ride north and the flat brown fields, and Cecil Holt saying, "They are no longer here," in the voice of someone who had closed a subject. He put the gloves away. He locked the annex. He went upstairs. On the day of the convening, Solon rose at his usual hour, ate at the usual time, and went to the vault at his usual time. He performed his morning inspection methodically, noting everything that needed noting in his log, with the same small, careful handwriting he had used since the first week. He ate the noon meal in the staff room and exchanged the usual minimal words with Nora and with Hugo Crane, who was moving through the manor that day, with the suppressed alertness of someone whose job was about to become significantly more demanding. He returned to the vault in the afternoon and worked through a section of the upper level that required a condition check, proceeding at the same pace as always. His mind was calm. He had done everything he could do. What remained was the evening. In the late afternoon, he heard the first carriages arriving on the road below the gate. He heard the gate open. He heard voices in the courtyard. New voices, multiple voices, the unfamiliar texture of people who had not been in this building before. He continued working. He noted, in his log, 2 vials whose wax seals required attention at the next cycle. He made the note in the same hand he always used. The sound of the manor shifted around him as the evening came on. Footsteps multiplied. Conversation filled spaces that were normally silent. The kitchen, 2 levels up, was producing smells that reached even down here, rich and layered, the smells of preparation on a scale that Cress had never used in the ordinary course of the household's days. He locked the vault and climbed the stairs. He changed into the plain dark coat he wore for formal household work. He went to the kitchen corridor and took up the position he had occupied every evening of his 5 months here. The reception hall doors were open. Light poured through them into the corridor. Warm, steady light from the candelabras that had been brought in and arranged by someone with a precise sense of occasion. The sound of many conversations, the kind of layered, careful talk that happened between powerful people who were also assessing each other. He stood in his position and watched the door. The evening had begun. The reception hall of Elder Harwick's manor held, by Solon's count, 43 people on the night of the grand convening. He had not been assigned to the event itself. He had been assigned, as he was every evening, to the kitchen corridor for post-supper cleanup assistance, a task that Cecil had given him 6 weeks into his time here and had never changed, because Solon had performed it consistently and without complaint, and had therefore become, in Cecil's management, a solved problem, which placed him, on this particular evening, in exactly the position he needed to be. He could see the entrance to the reception hall from the corridor. He could hear through the hall's open doors. He could, when the kitchen service door opened for each course, see a full portion of the room's interior. He had chosen this position deliberately months ago, the night Cecil first assigned him to it, and had never requested a change. The guests had arrived in carriages that came up the mountain road between the 5th and 7th hours of the evening. Solon had watched from the vault's condition check until his work was done, and then moved to his corridor position and watched them come through the gate. He had Pell's research and the lower vault's labels to draw from, and he matched faces and postures to names as the guests crossed the courtyard. A governor's particular bearing, a counselor's careful dress, a senior military figure's habit of checking the corners of every room before entering it. He matched 9 names to faces before the hall doors closed. 43 people. By any measure, the most concentrated gathering of power in the realm. Representatives of every body that made decisions, controlled resources, or held authority over the significant matters of the governed world. They had come here tonight because Elder Harwick had invited them, as he had invited the equivalent gathering a decade before, as he had apparently been doing in some form for 4 decades. They had come because an invitation from the Elder carried a weight that was difficult to decline, and they did not know why it carried that weight, because the people who had understood why it carried that weight had, over those 4 decades, been quietly removed. That was the architecture of it. Clean, patient, and almost without gaps. Almost. The Elder moved through the room with the ease of a person entirely at home in a situation he had built. He was unhurried. He gave each guest the particular focused attention that Solon had spent months watching him deploy. The quality of making a person feel, in the moment of his attention, that they were the most significant person in the room. He used this feeling the way a craftsman uses a well-maintained tool, precisely and without waste. He spoke to everyone. He touched nothing on the service tables himself. He held a glass of the general reception wine, the same that the guests were drinking, and he appeared to sip from it at appropriate intervals, without ever, Solon noted, actually consuming it. Solon watched what he could see, and listened to what he could hear, and tracked the time. The first service was the reception appetizers. Cress had been in the kitchen since before the 7th hour, managing a team of 4 additional preparation staff that Cecil had brought in for the event. She moved among them with the efficiency of a person who had organized this kitchen for 4 years and was not going to be made uncertain in it by 4 strangers. Solon watched her through the service door when it opened. He watched her hands, specifically. They were steady and precise, and moving with exactly the rhythm of a person doing work they knew in their bones. There was nothing in her movements that was different from any other evening service, except the scale. Not a single motion that was not exactly what a motion in that kitchen should be. The first service went out. It came back empty. Nothing changed in the room. The second service began. During this interval, Solon moved from his position to the lower east hallway. He walked at his normal pace. He did not look around himself. He passed the ventilation control point where the east grate met the main duct junction, and he slowed his pace just enough to hear what the airflow sounded like. It sounded different from the reception hall's ambient air. The quality was lighter, drier, with the particular character of air that had not passed through the treatment mechanism. Pell had been here. The sequence had been rerouted as planned, and the air currently moving through the reception hall was coming from the unmodified western intake rather than the prepared channel. Solon walked back to the corridor. He did not see Leanne during the evening. He had not expected to. She was in her rooms, in the position she occupied every evening, in the way she had occupied it every evening for however long she had lived in this manner. She was not where anything could be observed happening. The medical room adjacent to the elder's study had been visited at some point during the prior 2 days. She had not told him exactly when, and he had not asked. The antidote was no longer there. What the medical room contained instead, in the position where the antidote had been, was a preparation that Leon had described to him as broadly similar in appearance, but entirely different in its properties. He had not asked her what it was. He trusted her knowledge of her materials. The 3rd hour of the reception came, and the room stayed consistent. The sound from the hall was the sound of a gathering proceeding normally, the layered texture of many conversations at different levels of formality, the sound of glasses and service, the particular register of talk between people who are being careful about what they say in a room full of other people who are being equally careful. Powerful people at formal events spoke in a specific way. The words were not the meaning was in the space between the words, and what they were all actually exchanging was information about each other. The elder moved through this environment with a master's ease. He knew exactly which information to reveal and which to withhold, exactly how to make each person feel seen and considered, exactly how to keep a room of 43 competing interests comfortable and attentive, and not asking the questions that would have been dangerous to answer. Solon stood in his corridor and waited. The 4th hour came. The elder's private reserve had been placed on a secondary service table near the head of the room at the beginning of the evening, a dark decanter in its fitted case, attended by a single person whose role was to ensure it stayed where it was, and was handled by no one except the elder himself. Solon could see the secondary table from the corridor. The decanter sat where it had been placed. The elder had not touched it yet. The 4th hour ended. The 5th hour began. The final service went out. The room shifted into the quieter and more settled register of a gathering after its main meal. People moving between conversations. The particular relaxed quality of an event, in which the formal portion has concluded, and the informal portion has taken over. The elder moved toward the secondary table. He reached it and lifted the decanter with the comfortable familiarity of a person handling something that has always belonged to him. He poured a measure into his personal glass, the one kept separate from the general service, the one that had been set out for him specifically and handled by no one else. He turned to speak to Governor Aldrich Wren, who had moved to the head of the room, and he held the glass with the easy confidence of a man whose plan was unfolding exactly as he had designed it. The 5th hour moved. The conversations continued. The elder spoke with 3 more guests in sequence. He lifted his glass at appropriate intervals the way he had lifted the reception wine earlier, with the appearance of drinking. Solon watched from the doorway, and then the elder drank. He took an actual measure from the glass, and Solon watched the slight shift in his posture as he did it, the small adjustment of a man setting aside caution, because the moment had come, and the plan required it. He swallowed. He set the glass down. He turned to continue his conversation with the same composed ease as before. 4 minutes passed. 5. Then the elder's posture changed in the very specific way that Solon had anticipated. A small internal adjustment, the kind the body makes when it is registering something unexpected. a fractional stillness in the middle of a word. The elder continued speaking. He was not a person who alarmed easily, and whatever he was feeling in this moment was being managed by the same iron discipline that had managed everything else about him for decades. But it was not the feeling he had prepared for. Solon could see this from across the room in the set of the elder's shoulders and in the way his eyes had changed. 6 minutes. 7. A conversation stopped. The person the elder had been speaking with said something in a concerned voice. Another person nearby turned to look. A chair was moved. The particular configuration assembled itself around the elder, people closing in carefully, wanting to be present, but uncertain of what was happening. Solon straightened in the doorway. He moved to the kitchen service entrance, which gave him the best view of the room's center. He watched the elder, now seated in the chair that someone had positioned for him, with the focused and complete attention of someone who needed to know exactly what he was looking at. The elder's eyes moved. They went to the secondary table, to the decanter that still sat exactly where it had been placed, with its case and its dark glass and its apparent normalcy. They moved to the room, to the 43 guests who were all, without exception, entirely fine. Alert, in fact, with the heightened attention of a crowd that has registered something unusual. They moved to the medical room direction, and then they moved away from it, because the elder had just completed the calculation about what would be in the medical room and what would not be. Then his eyes moved to the corridor door. Solon was standing in it. He met the elder's gaze and held it. 3 seconds. Long enough for everything between them to be said without words. The 5 months in the vault, the testing sessions, the designed usefulness, and the designed expendability. The 91 days between catalog entries, the button in the alcove, the 84 names on the lower vault labels, the name of an 18-year-old sold for a debt on a platform in a wax-smelling hall. Long enough for the elder to understand completely what had happened and who had done it. Then Solon walked forward into the room. The room's energy shifted as he moved through it. He was known to the household staff, unknown to the guests. A young man in plain dark clothes, walking with the focused calm of someone who knew exactly where he was going and why. The room arranged itself around his passage, the way rooms arrange themselves around certainty. People moved. Space opened. He reached into his coat. The master ledger was a document he had taken that morning from the elder's administrative cabinet, using his vault clearance authorization, which extended to the adjacent administrative filing area, and which no one had thought to restrict because no one had imagined the vault attendant would have a reason to read the administrative archive. It was a heavy volume, bound in dark cloth, and it contained in the elder's own precise and careful handwriting 40 years of records, acquisition dates, compound names, targets, transaction details, outcomes noted in the spare language of someone who wanted accuracy, but not expressiveness. He held it in both hands in the center of the room and looked at the assembled faces. They were looking back at him, 43 of the most powerful people in the realm, looking at an 18-year-old vault attendant standing in the middle of their gathering, holding a document in his hands. "My name is Solon Ashwick," he said, in the clear and even voice he had rehearsed in his own mind for weeks. The voice of someone who was not performing calm, but who had found it through the specific process of knowing exactly what he knew, and exactly what he intended to do with it. "I have been the vault attendant in this house for 5 months. I would like to speak with the highest-ranking member of the governing council present in this room." The silence that followed was the particular silence of a room in which every person has just understood that the thing they are watching is not going to resolve in any direction they anticipated. Governor Aldrich Wren stepped forward from the edge of the room. He was a tall man, 70 years old, with the steady and watchful quality of someone who had made his career in governance by never moving faster than the situation required. He walked to where Solon was standing, and looked at the ledger, and then at Solon. Solon placed the ledger in both of the governor's hands. "This," he said, "is where we begin." Governor Aldrich Wren was a measured man. He was 70 years old, and had spent 40 of them in positions of authority, and he had the quality that very long experience in governance produces, the ability to be deeply surprised without showing it, to gather information under pressure, and to make decisions before the weight of the situation produced hesitation. He took the ledger from Solon's hands and opened it to the first page. He read for 30 seconds. He looked up. "Who else in this room knows the contents of this document?" he said. "As of this evening, no one," Solon said. "I have had access to the vault since my arrival." The ledger has been in the administrative cabinet. I removed it this morning. He was not being entirely truthful. Cress and Pell and Leon knew the shape of what the vault contained, though they had not seen this specific document. But the truth he was giving was the truth that mattered right now, and giving the full truth in the wrong order was one of the most effective ways he could think of to slow everything down. Aldrich Wren looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the room. Then he looked at Elder Harwick, who was seated and pale and very still. "Secure the room," Aldrich said, to no one in particular, but clearly to someone who would respond. And someone did. Two of his attendants moved to the doors. "No one leaves until I indicate." Solon stood in the center of the room, with his hands at his sides, and breathed steadily. The next 3 hours were the kind of hours that compress and expand at the same time. Large events happening in rapid sequence, each one carrying enough weight that it should have taken much longer, but all of them proceeding with the accelerating logic of something that has been building for a very long time, and is finally releasing. Aldrich Wren read the ledger. He passed relevant pages to the two other council representatives in the room, a man named Councillor Brent and a woman named Hazel Moore, who read them in the careful way of people reading things they will be asked to recall accurately. The guests arranged themselves in the quiet, waiting way of people who had been at a gathering and found it become something else entirely. Elder Harwick did not speak. He remained in the chair that had been moved for him, and his face was the face of someone who has completed a very long calculation and found that the final figure was not what they had arranged for it to be. At the end of the 3rd hour, Aldrich Wren closed the ledger and looked at Solon. "This document indicates targets for compounds held in the lower vault of this estate," he said. "It indicates a preparation and deployment sequence for the evening of this gathering. It indicates a record of prior actions over a period of 4 decades. He paused. "Can you verify these contents from independent knowledge?" "Yes," Solon said. "Close the ledger," Aldrich said. He held it out, and Solon took it and closed it. Aldrich looked at him steadily. "Tell me what you know." Solon told him. He began with the lower vault and its labels, the names, the organization, the difference between the upper vault's compound catalog and the lower vault's target-based system. He continued with the preparation schedule, which he recited in full from memory, timing and mechanisms and sequence and specific compounds. He described the 3 deployment mechanisms. He described the staged effect the elder had planned to produce on himself, and the intended use of the antidote that was no longer in its expected location. He described the compound that had replaced the elder's intended preparation in the private reserve, described it with the full chemical specificity that his ability gave him, the exact profile, the exact effect, the exact timeline. He recited 42 of the names from the lower vault's labels. He recited dates from Leanne's notebook, which he had memorized in a single reading, and which corresponded, name by name, to the vault's labeled sequence over the past 22 years. The room was completely silent. He did not raise his voice. He did not use any inflection designed to persuade. He described what he knew with the same precision he used when describing a compound's properties to the elder in the testing sessions, carefully, specifically, without emphasis, allowing the information to carry its own weight. When he finished, Aldrich Wren said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "How long have you been in this household?" "Approximately 5 months," Solon said. "And this ability you describe, the retention of compound profiles, this is something you have had for how long?" "Since birth, I believe," Solon said. "I was not aware of its full extent until I arrived here." Aldrich looked at the ledger. He looked at the room. He looked at Elder Harwick, who was watching Solon now, with the expression of someone doing a final calculation. "The compounds in the food and air treatment tonight," Aldrich said. "You indicate they were replaced." "Yes," Solon said. "By whom?" "Members of the household staff," Solon said, "who were in the same position I was in, brought here without choice, and assigned roles that placed them in proximity to what was being prepared. I will give you their names and their accounts when you wish. Tonight I wanted them to remain in their ordinary positions, to ensure the evening's operations were conducted as I've described." Aldrich Wren looked at him for a long moment, with an expression Solon could not entirely read. "You organized this," Aldrich said. "Yes," Solon said. "At 18 years old?" "Yes," Solon said. "While working as a vault attendant?" "Yes." Aldrich was quiet. He turned to Counselor Brent and Hazel Moore, and there was a brief, contained conversation in the low voices of people who have a great deal to say and are choosing their words with great care. Then he turned back. "Elder Harwick will be taken into custody tonight," he said, "by the authority of this council, pending a formal inquiry. The vault and its contents will be sealed, the estate will be secured." He paused. "The household staff who assisted in tonight's actions will give their accounts to the council's representatives. They will not be held responsible for their roles in this matter without full inquiry and consideration of their circumstances." He looked at Solon. "Is there anything else you need to tell me tonight?" he asked. Solon thought about this carefully. He thought about the full list of 84 names in the lower vault and how many of them were in this room right now. He thought about the 22-year list in Leanne's notebook. He thought about the 3 Ashwick vials and what it meant that they were there. "Several of the guests present tonight are among the listed targets in the lower vault," he said. "I would recommend they know this before they leave. The vault's lower level should be examined in detail, and the labels should be cross-referenced against the records I have described. Additionally, the Elder's personal archive, separate from the vault, may contain records that clarify the nature of actions already taken in previous years." Aldrich Wren nodded. He made a specific gesture to Counselor Brent, who moved toward the door. The room began to change around the edges, the way rooms change when formal authority begins to organize itself. Elder Harwick was asked to stand. He stood with the composure of someone who understood completely what was happening, and was managing it the way he managed everything, from behind the face of a person who intended to produce a specific impression. He looked, before he was guided toward the door, at Solon one final time. Solon met his gaze. He held it without expression. He did not look away. He kept his face the same as it had always been in this house. Still, unremarkable, taking in more than it gave back. Only now the thing he was giving back was a long, clear look at a person who had decided that the people around him were objects to be used and then set aside, and who had found, at the end of a very careful plan, that one of those objects had not stayed where it was put. The elder was guided out. In the morning, the governing council's inquiry team arrived at the estate before the first hour. Solon met them at the gate. He had slept a few hours and was composed and specific, and he took them first to the lower vault and stood in the doorway, while they read the labels and cross-referenced them against the ledger he had placed in their hands. He took them to the vault annex and showed them the private reserve, and described in precise and technical terms exactly what had been substituted, and exactly what the original compound had been. He showed them the catalog of the upper vault. He showed them the preparation schedule in the Elder's administrative records. He described every mechanism of the convening plan in full. Then he took them to Cress, who gave her account with the steady directness of someone who had been preparing to say what she had seen for 4 years, and was doing it now, with great care and great relief. He took them to Leanne, who placed her notebook on the table in front of the council's lead investigator, and said, simply, "This is what I have kept." He took them to Pell, who brought out 3 years of careful notations on the Elder's outgoing correspondence, and the subsequent movements of the people who had received it. The inquiry took 8 hours that first day. It continued over the following days, reaching into the documents and the records and the decades of what the vault had been building toward. The council representatives were thorough and exact, and they came back to Solon multiple times with specific questions, and each time he answered from the specific location in his memory where the relevant information was stored, without notes, without variation, without error. On the 4th day after the convening, Governor Aldrich Wren came to the manor and asked Solon to walk with him in the courtyard. They walked in the morning cold with the mountain above them, and the first snow of the deep season coming down in light, dry flakes that settled on the dark stone of the gate. "The inquiry has confirmed the substance of what you provided," Aldrich said. "The elder has been formally remanded to the council's custody. The vault's contents are being documented and secured. The lower vault's labels have been cross-referenced against the records." He paused. "Several council members who were present at the convening have asked me to convey their understanding of what occurred that evening." Solon nodded. "The members of the household who assisted in this matter," Aldrich said, "are being released from their contracts, with full recognition that those contracts were not entered freely. They are free to leave this estate." He looked at Solon. "That includes you." Solon looked at the iron gate at the end of the courtyard, the gate with the pattern of interlocked lines that he had examined on the first evening he arrived, standing in this same courtyard, with a key in his pocket, and no explanation of where he was going, or what was expected of him. "The 3 vials labeled with my family's initials," he said. "Are they part of the documentation?" "They are," Aldrich said. "They will be treated as evidence, as will all the lower vault's contents. Your family will be notified that their names were found in the target records. The notification will be handled by the council's office." "I don't need to be part of that notification," Solon said. Aldrich glanced at him. "No," he said. "You don't have to be." They walked another few paces in the quiet. "What will you do?" Aldrich asked. He said it with the genuine curiosity of someone who had, over the past 4 days, come to understand that the young man walking beside him was not easy to place in any category he had used before. Solon thought about it. He thought about the auction hall with its 60 people and its oil lamps. He thought about the carriage ride north and the field of flat brown winter grass. He thought about his first morning in the vault, standing in the cold and the neutral-smelling air, reading labels on glass vials that he did not yet understand. He thought about the button in the alcove. He thought about the first time he tasted a compound the elder had presented and felt his mind do something that no one in his life had ever told him it could do. He thought about Cress, who had been here 4 years before he arrived, moving with precise and careful hands through work she understood to the bone, and waiting, quietly and without knowing it, for something to shift. He thought about Pell, whose ink-stained hands had spent 3 years noting patterns in letters he was not supposed to fully read, keeping his observations folded in his pocket like something he was not sure yet what to do with. He thought about Leanne, who had kept her notebook with both hands, and walked into the most carefully guarded room in this manner, on the night of the convening, without showing a single sign of what she was doing. He thought about Elder Harwick's expression in the moment when the calculation had come out wrong. "I'm not sure yet," he said, which was honest. Aldrich nodded, as though this was the right answer. In the afternoon, Solon went to the vault for the last time. He let himself in with his key. He walked through the upper level and the lower level. He stood in the vault annex and looked at the private reserve in its temperature case, now sealed with the council's documentation markers. He did not feel what he had expected to feel. He had thought, in the days since the convening, that this room might feel different now, smaller perhaps, or less significant, now that it had been seen and documented and stripped of its operative purpose. It did not feel smaller. It was the same as it had always been. Cold, dry, quiet, precisely organized, the neutral air holding its silence around the rows and rows of glass. He had spent 5 months in this room. He had read every label. He had memorized every compound. He carried in his mind a complete and permanent archive of everything this vault held. Not just the names and locations, but the properties, the profiles, the full and detailed knowledge of what each vial contained and how it behaved. No one could take that from him. It was not in a document that could be locked away or destroyed. It was not in a record that could be sealed or lost. It was in him, permanently, in the deep and precise archive that his mind had always kept, that no one in his family had ever thought was worth anything, that this manor had tried to make use of, and had instead, through that attempt, made into something far more than anyone had planned for. He stood in the vault for a few minutes, and then he left, locking the door behind him one final time. He walked upstairs and through the corridor, and out through the main entrance into the cold mountain air. Cress was in the courtyard, wrapped in a coat, a bag at her feet. Pell was beside her. Leanne stood slightly apart, her notebook inside her coat where she always kept it. They looked at him as he came through the door. He stopped. He looked at the 3 of them. He thought about what he might say. "Thank you," was what he said. Cress looked at him. "We didn't do it for you," she said. She said it without cruelty, simply as a fact. "But you're welcome anyway." Pell offered a small, precise nod. Leon looked at the gate. The council had arranged transport for anyone who needed it. Carriages to the capital, from where people could go in whatever direction they chose. It was waiting at the gate. They walked toward it together, through the courtyard, past the iron gate with its pattern of interlocked lines. Solon did not look back at the manor. He had memorized every stone of it. He did not need to look. The mountain was behind them. The road ahead went down through the bare branched trees and the gray winter light, and eventually reached the flat open land of the valley. And beyond that, the distant edges of a world that was larger and more complicated than any window had ever made it look. He got into the carriage and put his hands in his lap and thought, with the clear and specific attention his mind gave to everything, about what came next. He did not know exactly what it was, but he was, for the first time in his life, going toward it of his own choosing, carrying nothing except his memory, which was, as it had always been, as it would always remain, entirely and irrevocably his. The carriage moved. The gate of Elder Harwick's manor passed out of sight behind them. And Solon, who had been sold like a line in a ledger, and had spent 5 months reading the room around him, until the room had no more secrets to keep, sat in the cold winter carriage, and breathed, simply and completely, for the first time, in a very long time.